Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, everyone. It's an enormous pleasure to be with you here this morning, to be back on home territory, to be back with so many good friends and good colleagues who gave me such support over the years, and to be, of course, with Phil, who's my successor as Member of Parliament for Sedgefield. He said there were 3 reasons why Hitachi Rail Europe came here. There is actually a 4th, and that was the work done by Phil, which was absolutely instrumental in bringing Hitachi here, so thank you, Phil. I remember when he first came to work for me as a baby-faced youth. Mind you, I was quite baby-faced myself at the time. Those were the days when they used to call me Bambi as an insult. Today, I'd probably take it as a compliment. But he's done a fantastic job as my successor, and he's one very good reason for voting Labour here on May the 7th. So I'm going to give my speech on Europe. I'm then going to take, because some of our colleagues from the London media have come all the way up here, and I'll take a few questions from them if you don't mind. And just to say, for all the people who've come up from London, this is the weather you can always expect in the northeast. It's very typical. And yeah, well, here we go. So elections should never simply be about an exchange of rhetoric, the laying out of policy positions, or the cacophony of the campaign. They should also be an investigation and a decision about our ambitions as a nation, who we are, where we're going. And for me, Europe is an important litmus test. I believe passionately that leaving Europe would leave Britain diminished in the world, do significant damage to our economy, and less obviously, but just as important to our future, would go against the very qualities that mark us out still as a great global nation. It would be a momentous decision. And should the Conservatives be re-elected on May the 7th, it is one which we will be called upon to make. If they win the election, they are committed to holding a referendum to debate whether Britain remains in the European Union. It will be held within 2 years. It will follow an attempt by the government to renegotiate the terms of Britain's membership. The referendum will be the first time since we joined Europe, after years of trying unsuccessfully to do so, the first time we put exit on the agenda. Now, there are several oddities about the way this has come to pass, frankly. In the leaders' debate last week, Europe featured little, and where it did, mainly as a route into the question of immigration. The truth is that the overwhelming majority of people in Britain will not decide their vote on the issue of Europe. Yet the vocal minority, for whom this is their raison d'etre, has already won this huge concession from the governing party. And then we don't actually know what the proposed renegotiated terms of membership look like. We've just been through the near-death experience for the UK of the Scottish referendum. That day was saved, but almost half the Scottish people voted to break up a partnership, which has served all the nations of the UK well for over 300 years. Now, the economic case for separation was always weak because of the way, over those years, our economies have integrated in the UK. Now that case has collapsed along with the oil price. And all the calculations made at the time of the referendum on revenue, on foreign exchange, on balance of payments are now massively reduced because the oil price has halved. Norway, for example, has suffered a 30% plus fall in the value of its currency. And I had to laugh when I heard the SNP leader challenge Ed Miliband the other night over whether he voted for Tory spending cuts. The reality is that had Scotland voted to exit the UK, it would now be in economic trauma, trying to negotiate its currency against the backdrop of the sliding global devaluation of oil-related economies. Never mind Tory cuts. They would be dwarfed by the SNP cuts necessary to keep the Scottish economy afloat in the radically altered market conditions we now face. But the point is this: despite that rational evisceration of the policy that defines the SNP, support for them, at least according to the polls, is even stronger than at the time of the referendum. Nationalism is a powerful sentiment. Let that genie out of the bottle, and it's a Herculean task to put it back in. And reason alone struggles. The referendum on Europe carries with it exactly the same risks. For that reason, should the Conservatives win, one other thing will be certain. The Prime Minister will be spending more energy, will have more sleepless nights about it, be more focused on it than literally any other single issue. He knows the vastness of the decision. He knows the penalty of failure. He knows exit will define his legacy. And following the Scottish referendum, he knows one other thing: the perilous fragility of public support for the sensible choice. It is a huge distraction for the country, but it will also be a huge distraction for the Prime Minister. It will take precedence over the NHS, education, law and order, the lot. And you know the oddest thing of all about having this referendum? The Prime Minister doesn't really believe that we should leave Europe. Not even the Europe as it is today. This was a concession to party, a manoeuvre to access some of the UKIP vote, a sop to the rampant anti-European feeling of parts of the media. But this issue, touching as it does the country's future, it's too important to be treated like this. It is greatly to Ed Miliband's credit that he resolutely refused to make that trade, right? He faced down calls to follow the Tory concession from parts of the media, many inside our party. And in doing so, he showed real leadership. He showed that he would put the interests of the country first, and he showed that on this, as on other issues, he's his own man with his own convictions and determined to follow them even when they go against the tide, and I respect that. The business case against exit from the European Union is obvious. Over half our trade is with Europe. I'm about to visit the Hitachi plant, which is itself a fantastic vote of confidence in the economic future of the North East, and as I said, a great tribute to Phil, our local MP. But Hitachi came here to access the European market. And there are millions of UK jobs dependent on that access. Now, I agree that not being part of the single currency is not, at least in the short or medium term, going to imperil the supremacy of the City of London as the world's greatest financial centre. But leaving Europe altogether, that's quite another thing. There is also, in my view, a complete underestimation of the short-term pain of negotiating exit. Right? There's a raft of different treaties, association agreements, partnerships that would have to be disentangled and renegotiated. There would be significant business uncertainty in the run-up to a vote, but should the vote go the way of exit, there would be the most intense period of business anxiety, reconsideration of options, and instability since the war. The Tory campaign, I hear talks of chaos should Labour win. Think of the chaos produced by the possibility, never mind the reality, of Britain actually quitting Europe. Jobs that are secure, suddenly insecure. investment decisions postponed or cancelled, a pall of unpredictability hanging over the British economy. And for what? To satisfy the insistent Europhobia of a group who will never be satisfied. So there is a beguiling notion that upon Britain voting to leave, the rest of Europe would be in an amenable and friendly frame of mind in the consequent negotiation. They would have, it is said, a shared interest in making it as amicable as possible. Excuse me, but get real. As a result of our decision, every other European leader would be faced with big choices about the terms of Britain's relationship with Europe, now as an outsider. They would regard this as a wholly unnecessary diversion from the critical domestic challenges they have of recovering their own economies. They will believe that Britain wants to have the benefits of the single market, but without its responsibilities, and they will be determined to prevent that. And Norway and Switzerland, both Norway and Switzerland are obliged, as the price of their access to Europe's market, to accede to a series of European rules, even though they cannot influence their drafting. The rest of Europe will be vigorous in ensuring Britain gets no special treatment. This will be a horrible process. Don't be in any doubt about that. And I'm aghast at some of the arguments used as to why having such a vote is a great idea for democracy. Apparently we should have a referendum because it's 40 years since we last had a vote. I mean, that is seriously an argument for doing something of this magnitude and risk? A sort of keeping us on our toes sort of thing? I mean, should we do the same for NATO? Or have periodic referendums not just in Scotland, but all over the UK, just to check popular feeling? We should have a referendum if we seriously believe that getting out of Europe is a national priority if our terms aren't met. But if we don't, then I say it is a completely unacceptable gamble with our nation's future. Thank you. Or we're told that in the case of Scotland, the referendum proved a great thing because of the exceptionally high turnout. That only proves the importance of the decision. And I agree, a vote in Europe would also be of importance. Doesn't mean it's sensible to have it. So if I was leading a business dependent on access to the single market, or more important, employed in such a business, then the issue of Europe and the risks of this referendum concession would be a big decider in my vote. However, the case for Britain staying in Europe is much more than about business. It is also crucially about Britain's role as a global player. In the 20th century, even as Britain declined in relative importance to the USA as a global power, we were able to maintain a position as one of the world's leading nations. We kept our alliance with America strong. We entered the European Union precisely to ensure our position. There are two well-founded pillars of British foreign policy, and they're mutually reinforcing. And through these alliances, we exercise a power greater than our relative size would otherwise bring us. Now, as one of the world's traditional powers, this is a sensible strategy for us to pursue in order to be able to hold that position. But here's the thing. Today, as the world goes through a geopolitical revolution, this strategy is one being pursued by similar-sized countries everywhere. The rise of China is the single biggest geopolitical change in my children's lifetime. Now, true, China has many challenges, but the last decades have seen them become a dominant economic and political force. This is only going to accelerate. Now, China's population is 20 times that of the UK. In time, the same will happen with India. And then there are other countries, like Indonesia, for example, a population 3 times the size of Germany. This is all completely obvious. But as a result, round the world, countries are banding together, not in opposition to the rising powers, but in recognition of the geopolitical fact that they've risen. So, for example, in the Far East, the ASEAN alliance has gone from being an alliance somewhat sleepily developed to suddenly becoming an important priority for countries like the Philippines, Vietnam, Indonesia, who realize that even all together, the ASEAN nations are half the size of their powerful neighbor to the north. In Latin America, it is the same, with the Pacific Alliance and Mercosur. A country like Mexico is forging ever closer relationships with North America, USA and Canada. Some of this is driven by trade, of course, but it is also part of a global adjustment of the power relationships in this new world. And for Europe, the crisis of the single currency has obscured one central new reality. That despite all the travails of recent years, the objective case for Europe has actually never been stronger, precisely for these geopolitical reasons. Europe and the USA, for example, are trying to negotiate a new trade partnership. Only Europe together could achieve such a huge undertaking with such significance for European business, including the ability to affect commerce with China and India. And then there is the issue of resurgent Russian nationalism. This will both test Europe and demand it stick together. And I do not think we yet fully appreciate the degree of threat which the Eastern European nations feel under. Without the shelter, not just of NATO, but of the EU, their vulnerability, with consequences for our own security, would be chronic. And then, of course, there is the issue of Islamist extremism, whose threat is real, present, and clear. It affects all European nations. With all of this happening, do we really think this is the time in which to put into play our very membership of the European Union, the largest commercial market and most developed political union in the world, and the one on our doorstep? So instead of playing a leading role in resolving these common challenges, we would decide to engage in the juddering impact of a negotiation which would weaken all these alliances and put us out of the leadership game? Remember the relief we felt when Scotland voted no. So why was that? Because towards the end, having paid only intermittent attention to the enormity of the decision, we awoke to it and realized, I think with shock, how close we had come to relegating ourselves from the Premier League of Nations. Now think if the vote had gone the other way. It doesn't bear thinking of. It would be exactly the same with a vote on Europe. We're frankly not much focused on it now, but it is the same semi-conscious torpor that almost led to disaster in keeping the UK together. And if we think having the vote will resolve the issue, well, think again about Scotland now. This alliance with Europe was sought half a century ago by the then leaders of our country because they knew that without it, Britain could not maintain its influence and its power. And of course it involves ceding or pooling some sovereignty. But it does so in order to gain sovereign power over decisions that in the reality of 21st century geopolitics, we will only exercise in concert with other nations. The anti-Europe faction in British politics argues that Britain can take back its freedom by leaving the EU. But the whole point of an alliance is that you enlarge your freedom to influence and to shape events through the instrument of partnership. And today, with globalization ever blurring national boundaries and forcing integration upon the world, such alliances are becoming the norm for every region of the world. Europe as an idea may have been born out of the wreckage of war, but today its rationale is not peace, but power, and it grows ever stronger for the countries within it. Now, none of this, of course, invalidates the case for reform in Europe. And here is the tragedy of Britain framing this debate about reform purely in terms of Britain's relationship with Europe and not Europe's relationship with its own structure and rules. Britain has many allies in this quest for change. The French-German motor of Europe remains powerful, but the past years of the financial crisis have put it under strain as a vehicle for European progress. And in any event, both countries and the other key European players want and need a strong Britain to balance Europe. The movement for change in Europe would benefit hugely from British input and British leadership. Nationalist forces in Europe, see the National Front in France, are surging everywhere. So this is the very opportunity for Britain to show both its own character and the way forward for Europe. And it is why Britain leaving Europe would ultimately be so contrary to what makes Britain as a nation successful and great. You know, we're a creative country, as our most recent inventions in science and technology have shown, including some up here in the Northeast. To say nothing of the creative arts and their contribution, not just to our culture, but to our economy. Our education system, for all its faults, remains admired. It draws students to it from all corners of the globe. And we have the English language, the preeminent language, an extraordinary product of good statesmanship and good fortune. We have always done best as a people, out there in the world, engaged, active on the world stage. We won the bid for the Olympics precisely because this was the image of Britain abroad, and because London was seen as a thriving melting pot of different cultures and peoples. This is the spirit of modern Britain. And I know that those who want us out of Europe, they say, well, they agree with all of that, but we can do just as well, if not better, out, not in. So in theory, part of that may be true. But just reflect on the forces leading the campaign to get us out. UKIP and the right of the Tory party. And ask yourself this question. Do they represent that spirit? Are they the standard bearers of an open-minded, culturally tolerant Britain? Are creativity, innovation, and curiosity about the world and what we can learn their hallmarks? We know what this movement to wrench us out of Europe is based on. You can see it on display when Mr. Farage swiftly moves the debate to immigrants. National pride is a great thing. Nationalism as a political cause in the hands of parties like UKIP is almost always ugly and can never, despite being wrapped in the garb of high-sounding phrases, it can never disguise its essentially mean spirit. So that's why this debate over Europe matters more than we know. Because it says something very profound about us as a country. And this becomes very plain when you speak to people outside of Britain about whether Britain should leave Europe. And wherever you go, USA, China, India, by the way, all the countries the Eurofantasists say would be so keen to have independent relations with us, they approach the question with a certain amount of incredulity. And the most common response I find is they say, why would you do that? They think we won't, of course. And probably, and hopefully in the end, that's right. But it's interesting to probe the reason for their incredulity. It's not simply about the politics or the economics. It is that Britain giving up on Europe contradicts their sense of what Britain is about as a country. And it's the same reason that I am so passionate about this issue. It isn't just about money or power. It is about character. It's about who we are and where we're going as a nation. A decision to quit Europe would say a lot about us, and none of it good. That an adventurous country has become a timid one. That one with global ambitions has become a parochial bystander. That a country known for its openness to the world shuts the open door nearest to it. That a nation which has built its history on confidence towards others defines itself by resentment to others. And that with all the changes of the world crowding in upon us and demanding strong and clear leadership, instead of us saying, here's where the world should go, we say, count us out. It isn't an accident of history that has put us in Europe. It was an accident of history that we weren't in it from the beginning. So think about that vote on May the 7th. Think of the consequences of a re-elected Tory government making the central question of the next Parliament whether we get out of Europe or not. Think about the risk such a referendum poses. Think about our past and our future. Labour and its leader took a brave decision when they decided not to yield to pressure, but instead to make the principled and intelligent case for Britain in Europe. In doing so, in my view, they showed that they understand Britain's future and its destiny better than those prepared to trade policy for political advantage. That is one very good reason, amongst many others, for voting Labour on May the 7th. I want Labour to win. I want us to win for the future of our country and its place in the world. I want Labour, under Ed's leadership, to be the government of our country on May the 8th. And I believe we can and we will do it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Please, let's. Thanks, guys. Thank you. Thanks very much, and I'll have a chance, by the way, I can come through and have coffee with everyone and we can mingle and chat afterwards, but I'll take some of the questions from some of the faces I recognise from the old days. James.
Good morning, Mr. Blair. James Landau, BBC. You agree with Ed Miliband on Europe. I just wonder what else you agree with him about. For example, do you share his critique of the business world and current modern capitalism? And secondly, if I may, why are you not sharing a platform with Ed Miliband? Is he intimidated by your past electoral success, or is he embarrassed by your current reputation?
Right. I think, if you don't mind, I think it's perfectly sensible I make the speech on Europe today. Ed is, I think, down in Bristol campaigning on the National Health Service, and We're a party that can do them more than one thing at once, which is why we make a very good government. And secondly, by the way, I agree completely with what he's saying about the central challenge of inequality in our country today. I think he's absolutely right to know that the times have changed, that this is a huge issue for people, and I think he's got an excellent set of policies to deal with it. I've got Sophie and Chris. Who are they?
Hi,
right.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Blair. Chris Ship from ITV News. You've just said that as a country we've been through the near-death experience of the referendum in Scotland. Is it not true that Labour's potentially facing an actual death experience in Scotland right now? And do you regret setting in motion that chain of events which has led to this surge in nationalism? And what do you think went wrong in Scotland? Secondly, if I can ask two questions, Mr. Blair, as you're here. You still think Ed Miliband can win? I presume that's very much the case. When did you change your mind? You won 3 elections by being on the centre ground. You said that's the only way to win elections. You now clearly think that it's possible for Labour to win an election by being to the left of the centre.
I've always had the view that Ed can win, and I'm sure and hope that he will. As for the situation in Scotland, look, I think we were absolutely right to introduce devolution. This has been a debate, by the way, if you go back in history in the 19th century, it dominated politics, the whole question of devolution then for many, many years. We do face a tough challenge in Scotland, but we've got a great new leader of the Scottish Labour Party, and we've got a great case to make. And I'm one of those people, despite everything, remains optimistic that in the end reason breaks through. And I'm sure it will in the case of Scotland too. Yes, you must be Sophie.
I'm Sophie, sorry.
Oh, you're Sophie. Right.
Sophie Ridge, Sky News. Do you find it upsetting that even though you won 3 elections, there's still a significant number of people within the Labour movement who view you as a hindrance rather than a help to Labour's election chances? And are you planning on sharing a platform with Ed Miliband at any point during this campaign?
Well, as I've just said to you about sharing a platform, I'm delighted to be on many platforms with Ed over a long period of time. And I, just so that you understand this and get this fully, I support him 100% to lead our party to victory at the next election. Secondly, you know, one of the things that I experienced even when I first became Labour leader is there's always been disagreement within the Labour Party. Different people who have different views about how we should approach things. But the important thing is what we share in common, right? And what we share in common is a deep and profound belief in social justice, in the belief that it is the purpose of a Labour government to bring opportunity to those people that don't have it, and a belief also that it is right that our society and our country and its economy are run in the interests of the many and not the few. And those are values that unite the Labour Party, they're what keep us strong, and they're what should see us on course for a general election victory on May the 7th. Thank you. So, thank you very much indeed. We're now going to have a chance to mingle. I know I'll be talking to some of the local media later when I visit the Hitachi plant. Thank you guys for coming all the way up from London. I hope it was productive. I'm not sure I mean that sincerely, but anyway. No, I'm sure it's always a great thing to be involved in the election campaign. And thank you all, most of all of you, for coming along today. It's been an absolute pleasure and honour to be with you. Thank you.